Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Change the Game podcast, where we unite a community of like-minded and like-hearted organizations who are changing the game by doing business differently. Every week, we're seeking out the most inspirational stories of how people are changing the game, how the great game of business principles play a role, and how it is done. And we think that's capitalism at its best. So we're trying to find out what are the lessons people learn through their experience, and what's the big takeaway that you guys, the listeners, can learn from the guest and start implementing in your organizations today? For what it's worth, great game companies and organizations demystify business. They break down the walls and the hype that make business an elite sport for the select few that keeps everybody else in the dark and out of the money. Together, we can save the American dream by closing the gap between the haves and have-nots, and that's our mission. That's our big, hairy, audacious goal, is to transform the world, save 10 million lives, transform 10 million lives in the next 10 years. So our community exists for people to learn, share, and celebrate the game-changing principles and practices that were inspired by Jack Stack's original book, The Great Game of Business, A Stake in the Outcome and Change the Game. And here with me today is my pal and boss and co-host and co-author of our new book, Get in the Game, available where fine books are sold. Rich Armstrong, how you doing?
Good. Good morning, Steve.
Good morning. We got a fun day planned today. Our theme is why timing is everything, and we've got some pretty cool guests with us today. We've got Caleb Clark and Tony Lamb with us from Hook and Ladder up in Canada, and we'll talk about them in just a moment. I'll tell you what, I have two quotes. I normally start with housekeeping and quotes. The housekeeping's easy. Everybody's muted just to maintain audio quality. We highly recommend that you participate. This is a fun, interactive podcast, and we want you to use the Q&A box, get your questions in there, and Rich and I will get to them as we can. So the quotes now, the reason I picked two is, one is because of our guests. And that is, timing is everything. So it's one of my favorites. I know it's probably overused, but it's an old Chinese proverb that says the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. Second best time is now. And I try to teach my kids that, but they're not listening yet. So we're going to find out how that works out. The other one is this week in Jack Stack's, semi-weekly calls. We had them when the pandemic first started. We had them every day, and then he started to do them several times a week. But the other day, Rich, you might remember him saying, without business, there is no society. And I thought, with everything's going on right now, that we probably need to focus on not only, obviously, social change, but the fact is that all of the things that we want to have happen are funded by what is a result of business. And that is really powerful to think about. So I was talking to my daughter this week, and she was really freaked out about, what was going on, and she didn't feel like she was making a difference. And I said, honey, you can only really affect, your sphere of influence. So what are you going to change? How do you improve your little world? And I thought about, that's what we're doing every day at SRC and at Great Game Companies, is just working on our communities. And, it really set her mind at ease. She said she slept better, she felt better about herself, and she started to make plans to do things. So without business, there is no society. I'm digging this stuff. So
I'm glad you're having that kind of level of conversation with your daughter. My conversation last night was her air conditioning didn't work at her apartment. What was I going to do about it?
I'm not saying those things don't happen.
Level conversations than I have.
I'm not saying that we don't have those conversations, but it's just, it's inspirational because you're always worried about, the next generation. And I kind of feel like we have the next generation with us today. So here's the way I want to introduce these guys, because they really need to tell their story. But what we want to talk to Hook and Ladder about today is how a Division I football player and a ping pong champ can join forces to form an all-in-one team to help you guys build your online marketing platforms, from strategy, design, development, to marketing tools and analytics. How in 1 year they plan to triple their workforce and double their revenue. And they engaged Great Game coach Catherine Fitzgerald to help them along the path. That's what we want to talk about. So welcome, Caleb and Tony. How you guys doing?
Doing very well.
Morning,
How are you
guys.
doing?
Thanks
Morning.
for
Morning.
thanks for being here. It's really great. We had a lot of fun preparing for this. I know we're going to have even more fun talking about everything today, and hopefully some really cool questions coming in from the community. I'm going to start out. I don't want it to be the Steve show here, but I'm super excited. If I get emotional, I'll get a tissue or something. We'll be ready to go here. But you guys have a killer origin story. So tell us a little bit about, how did you get started? Why the name Hook and Ladder? Tell us about what it's all about.
Well, I'll introduce how we how we first met each other. Tony and I were part of the same MBA cohort in Vancouver at Simon Fraser University, and right towards the end of our year there was an opportunity made available to the class to kind of break into groups for those that are interested to build a marketing strategy and execution plan, and then actually take care of the execution for a national car dealership. And they were introducing the Toyota Scion into Canada. And we were
right.
So I put up my hand. I was interested in playing a part, and Tony put up his hand. He was this kid in the front row. I was in the back, and we ended up in the same team, and a bond was formed out of that. We then went on to execute this plan for 6 months for a paid internship, and then afterwards we decided we wanted to get into business together. And Tony, I'm probably missing a few details there from your perspective.
Well, one thing to add is that we really didn't know much back then when we were running that marketing program, but we did learn a lot. And then basically what happened was after the program, because basically the marketing case competition was being held at the MBA school, right? And then they were saying, okay, well, the winning team gets to win the contract to execute that program. Like, I don't know about you, Caleb, but at that time I was thinking, damn, this is gonna be a big opportunity. I don't know anything about marketing because I went into the MBA program as a mechanical engineer, right? I'm a numbers guy. I'm always physics, chemistry, math. That's my background, right? It's like, but marketing was fun, and this sounds like a great opportunity. Let's go do it. And then, I stood up, like, hey, who wants to form a team? I think Caleb, you're right behind me. And that's how we got started.
That was 10 years ago. Ago. So.
And then you guys took a little bit of a split. Tony, you went to work for Accenture and got into businesses that were really all over the world and got to see how business worked in a lot of different cultures and places and geographies. And Caleb, did you go directly into the marketing side, or what was that part?
Yeah, so I mean, we started the business right away, pretty much right away after the MBA, but we could only afford to pay one of us. So we said, well, Tony, you go build a base of credibility and understand how the big guys, build a company and do things like operations and finance, everything like that. And I'll go, sling our wares on the street and see if we can get some clients. And so that's what we did. And I moved to Mexico so we could keep costs down, did that for 5 years. And then
you're living in your bedroom, you're working in your bedroom for how long?
Yeah. It was the same bedroom in Mexico where it was my office for like 4 years.
Oddly, we're very close to that right now again, aren't we? Because of the COVID.
Exactly. That's right.
I'm coming to you from under the stairs. So,
what is it, Harry Potter?
Where the ping pong championship fit into all of this? That's a lot to do with.
I have no idea, Steve, where you pulled that stats. I mean, Caleb is a football star, right? And Hook and Ladder actually has some relations to that, to football. For me, I was never a ping pong champ. I used to play a lot of ping pong. I was like, some high school ranked players in the province, but that was nothing to really mention of that 20 years ago, right? So, yeah. But back to what you were saying, Steve. Like the path of us kind of diverging and converging again, it was part of the plan, and I would do it exactly the same way that we did it. We being financial being a matter, right? Like a brand new startup for two people who've never started a business before. We have a lot of passion, but we lack the relationship, we lack the knowledge, right? And so when you go outside of business school, two very typical career path is that you either go into the iBanking route or you go into the consulting route. And for myself, with an engineering background, the consulting route just makes a lot of sense, right? Like the problem solving, analytical type of function. So and so I wanted to work for a big consulting agency and end up at Accenture. But the thinking was that, okay, we're going to go and we started the business right after we finished university or our MBA program, where Caleb's out there, really building on the network, building on the digital marketing component. Tony's going to go learn from some of these big guys on how they run a service-based business, right? Systems and process or whatnot, right? And then from there, 5 years from now was the plan to kind of come back and, well, let's apply the systems and process and knowledge and the network and marketing skill sets and make this a serious thing. That's basically what happened. I think it took close to 7 years for me to be full-time at Hook and Ladder, but that's exactly what happened.
Nice. So I love the fact that you made a plan and you did the divergence over time and then came back together, because so many people are like, someday we're going to do this together. And, they never quite get there. But let's go back to the theme of timing is everything. So in a recent interview with Darren Dahl, you're quoted as saying, I can't stop thinking about how lucky we are that we started playing just weeks before the virus hit, meaning playing the great game of business. I don't know how we would have handled it. And I'm going, luck? Really? You literally had just launched the game the week before the world ended. So what was that like? Was it really luck?
Well, I don't know. Luck is a funny word, right? I guess feel maybe grateful is the word, and feel fortunate because I was mentioning to Darren also that during the meat of COVID, there is a lot of people in my ear from EO Network, my forum, different people I hold their opinion highly. We're saying, you gotta take this opportunity to cut some fat, right? Go lean, go back to the old days. You and Tony, you gotta get through this, right? And a lot of these conversations were weighing heavily on me, right? And so, being able to chat with Catherine and really look at, hey, the plan is the plan, and it gave us that confidence to kind of push through it. But the biggest thing is that, the team, I think it was the Monday that we announced it, and the next day on Tuesday, because we had just gone through the on-site and we had, become aware as a team of the financials and how the game is played and line of sight and all these things, it was unbelievable, sort of the rallying call that naturally happened amongst the team, and the confidence that was beaming from people in terms of hey guys, we're in a bad situation, but at least we all know what the situation is, and we have line of sight in terms of what we do tomorrow implicates our survival rate tomorrow. You know what I mean? That's why I feel fortunate and grateful, is because if that information was held just within Tony and I'm not sure if we would have the horsepower necessary to emotionally get through it.
Right.
It being the 3 months, right? So there were times where Tony and I were down, right? We're humans, and maybe someone else from the team would come in and share something that they remembered from the on-site. That was just that little thing that built to our confidence coming through. And then Catherine, I mean, what can you say, right? I mean, been amazing.
Yeah, she's radiant, man. She emanates light, right?
Yeah,
love it.
So that's what I would say. Luck, maybe not luck, but fortunate and grateful about that. The timing was ironic.
Yeah,
I would have drawn it up differently. I'm sure you guys draw it up differently. I know the plan isn't to have an on-site, get everyone rallied, and then a global economic meltdown a week later. So
it's not one of the 10 steps.
Okay, all right.
Have you heard of the saying that luck is basically when preparation meets opportunity, right?
Yep.
Bingo.
And when I think about there's one very specific example that reminds me of the luck in terms of having brought in the great game, bringing Catherine, having Michelle Bridges as part of our on-site, and how that has, relates to the term luck, which was, we had our, I think, initial on-site implement, bringing everyone together. We flew team members from East Coast, we are based on the West Coast. We have one team member from Colombia, go great lengths to come all the way up to Calgary.
Wow.
And then we got everyone, really excited about the whole system and process. And of course, like Caleb was saying, very, very shortly after, I can't remember how many weeks, right, is when COVID kind of paralyzed, basically the continent. But then one of the things that we were able to do during those first few weeks was that we were able to bring the team up of their financial literacy to a certain level, right? You know, not to say that they're experts, not financial ninjas or anything, but at the very least, they understand, okay, well, here's the balance sheet, here's the P&L, here's how the companies makes money, here's the line of sight to a degree.
Yeah,
and then the basics, exactly, which was absent. And I would argue it's absent for a lot of companies. I worked for Accenture as a middle management for 7 years, and most people probably don't know that stuff, right? So with that being said, you know, when COVID hits, something that we had to do actually was an idea that Catherine brought about, which is fabulous idea. So thank you for that. I know Catherine was probably listening to this, but it was the idea of, well, maybe you guys should build a plan A, plan B, plan C, plan D. So the team is aware of, okay, well, if this is a situation, here's what's going to happen, but we have a plan and we all have the ability to impact the result, right? I was thinking to myself, well, you know, that was a great idea. If we never brought Catherine and the Great Game system into our lives, we probably might not even have thought about that idea. But let's say if we did, trying to communicate that plan A, B, C, D to all the team members without them having a certain level of financial literacy and a thought process about Great Game is going to be pretty hard. If we never read a book and go through those exercises and whatnot. So that is one very practical example of what I felt like we are very fortunate to have done what we did in those borders.
No, that's great. That's great. Did you have any kind of pushback or initial pushback or challenges with the staff accepting this way of doing business or learning the financials, that sort of thing?
I think the pushback was there's some hesitancy in maybe the timing. I know for me, it's actually funny. On our on-site, Tony and I, even in the middle of it, we were learning, like, what are we doing right now? Like these exercises on the table or on the wall. And Catherine and Michelle, you know, Michelle is a pretty dull person, right? So she doesn't have a lot of energy or anything like that. But
Not at all, right?
She was saying, Caleb, just trust the process. And I was like, I'm gonna trust the process. But I drove them back to their hotel that night and I said, guys, what the heck was that exercise? Like, I don't get it. I thought I get it and I did, but it wasn't until the next day where it came all in. And so I thought there was a little bit of pushback by me, which is funny. But I think overall the team was, I think they were pumped and excited about the fact that, like, it was pretty big time, right? We're bringing 2 coaches in from US, and it's, you know, 2 full days blocked off for this. So there was a sense of legitimacy to it. And I would say overall, that was a big part of why we were able to start playing the game so quick, is that everyone was just pretty bought in, I'd say.
Good. I'm curious then, we're always thinking that, you know, this next generation of workforce, this new generation, you guys are young entrepreneurs, at least a lot younger than Steve and I, but
hey, I'm 20 in my head, so just speak for yourself, man.
Still 18. No, 21. I want to drink.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, one of the things is that, you know, this idea of transparency, high involvement, rewards and recognition, those types of things are elements of the Great Game. Do you feel like that resonates more with this next generation, this younger generation workforce, or any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, Tony, go ahead, Tony. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll start off and then you can maybe add to your thoughts, Caleb. I think 2 things comes to mind. So we run a marketing agency. Like you guys looking at Caleb and myself as being young, we look at our team members, like they're like a lot younger than us, right? And that's just the nature of the marketing industry as well. And you know, I guess my firsthand experience on that, given that I have worked in Accenture and I've seen how they have transformed their culture as well to become a lot less distinct in terms of hierarchy, right? A lot more being like organization, generally speaking, become a lot more flat. Like people have the opportunity to go outside of their own defined role. You know, not to say that they don't fulfill their own role, but to have the option and it welcomes the flexibility of team members going outside and try to, you know, take on more ownership. That I've witnessed that as part of Accenture throughout the course of the 7 years that I've been there. But Great Game takes it to whole different level, right? It's the next level in terms of opening that up to encourage transparency in that front. And I do believe that the younger workforce, now that the fact is that we're living in a world where information is readily accessible. Whether you tell them the information or not, they will find out one way or the other. So you being the leader might as well give them the information and empower them in one way. So that's kind of my first thought to it. But the other thought is that if you think about all the different kind of trends in the workforce, where like if you think about, let's say, software development, right? Like, I came with a project management background where, back in 10, 15 years ago, if you're a software developer, every single project is being managed with like a waterfall based, a methodology, right? Where you go, okay, well, I'm going to go and plan a 1-year program where I'm going to spend the first month analyzing the requirements, next month designing, the next month building, and then you're testing, and then you eventually deploy it. But that system has proven itself to not really work in the world like this, where everything is transforming to be something a lot more agile, which means that you're doing all those cycles within like a 2 weeks time frame to deploy something of smaller value to the team members, so that you can take the information that you gather from the last 2 weeks to implement it this 2 weeks, right? So and when I think about the Great Game, it very much follows those concepts, which is, what, we go through like weekly forecasts. We give team members the information from the previous week so we can take the corresponding actions in the next period to make an impact down the road, as opposed to, the traditional ways of, okay, well, it's a semi-annual performance review, bonus or whatnot, right? Which basically doesn't really give people the time the ability to really make real impact in real time, and no transparency or whatnot. So I guess that's my long about way of answering that question. But when I think about, okay, well, if I were to equate the old way of managing a business to a waterfall project management system, whereas like, the way how we're talking about the Great Game, similar to more of an agile way of managing a project, to me, it's very, very similar, where, that's where the trends are going. The trends are, and you need to be more transparent, you need to be more agile, you need to be more iterative. So that's part of the reason why I believe that that's the right move for our company as well.
Yeah, I love that word iterative, because it's, it's about, we know where the goal is. The plan is the plan, as you guys have said, but we're constantly iterating of how we get to the goal, which is, Caleb, in your world, of football, isn't that the way football works? You know where the post is, it's like it's at the end, but how you get there changes with every play, right?
Totally. I think the other thing that resonated, why Great Game resonates with our team so much, I mean, this is true of humans, but I think especially of the younger generation, is that they're addicted to creating things, right? Like having their individual fingerprint on things that are built into the world. And you see that demonstrated on social media every day, right? So I think that one thing that really resonated with Great Game for our team is that, they had a hand in building what is, the hook and ladder version of today. And the classic quote from Great Game, right? People support what they help create. And so I think that with that as like a truth woven into the fibers of the game, that's why it resonated so deeply with our team, is that we're literally building something and putting it into the world. So I'm all for that, right? As a young budding marketing professional, right?
I love it. So let's talk about the stuff nobody wants to talk about. And this is when you first started. You've already mentioned Catherine Fitzgerald and Michelle Bridges, so one of our great coaches and one of our top trainers. I'm surprised you have a roof, because usually they blow the roof off of the damn place. So you hired a coach, right? And so I'd like to know why you hired a coach. You kind of touched on it before, but here's the follow-up that is really bugging me the most is, you've got to go talk to your people. For the first time in their lives, they're being treated like adults. They're being shown financial information, asked to impact it on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. You're just starting that journey, and you go, oh, by the way, we have another expense line. It's a coach. Talk about that.
Chris,
to
go
start?
ahead. I remember, or Tony, go ahead. We were talking to Chris, I believe, on from Great Game, but I remember the conversation vividly. Tony, we heard the pitch, we hung up, we had a conversation, and I remember what you said. But go ahead. That was
Really, I remember what you said. You told me that,
okay.
well, it's either we're going to go and hire a coach or we're going to not do a great game. That's kind of what you're saying.
So,
But basically, I can't remember who said it, but basically what I recall was that, we were referencing how, how many clients that we have talked to who told us that they can do digital marketing themselves, but
Gotcha.
they've never done it, right? It's like, would you try to learn how to swim if you could hire somebody who is good at swimming or is a teacher in swimming? Would you, ultimately it's just about like trying to go solo on doing something that you've never done before, which is extremely important. It's probably not the best way as opposed to, having somebody who leads you through the process, right? So we were putting ourselves in the situations of those clients who we, as the expert, know that they don't even know what questions to ask at this point, and we're just acknowledging that we are at that state in terms of great game.
Yeah,
so what
I'm glad we made that decision, Tony, because like you were saying, I think we naturally both said to each other, like, hey, we can figure it out. We're like,
You're smart.
Everyone in your own head think we're smarter than anyone in the world, right? We have, like, that's what you think, right?
Yeah.
But man, in hindsight, like, I can think of 6 things off the top of my head that, like, there's no way we would have implemented that or thought about it in that way. And, or to have Catherine, like, sometimes we would say things and Catherine's like, quick coaching point. She's so graceful in terms of how, like, quick coaching point on that. I was like, oh, I'm glad we didn't do what we thought we should have done, because that would have been a mistake. So,
so did anyone? I'm just dying to know. So you guys are convinced. You get off the phone and you're like, hey, I love the example of a swimming instructor. I mean, you can tread water and die, or you can have the graceful. I like that word, graceful. You can learn how to let the water float you, I mean, it's not a fight. So did anybody else, you guys got it right away. Did anybody else go, well, wait a minute, tell me why we're spending money on this? I mean, was that a conversation, or did everybody just like go, oh, okay, makes sense?
I remember one thing at first, there was a little bit of that, but it was pretty clear in everyone's mind after they read the book. Like, we had a number of key people that read the book, and they're like, it seems to me to be the only logical way to run a business, right? Which is another coined term, but that's my experience on it, Tony. I don't know if you had it.
So one thing to add is that when we actually had interaction with the Great Game organization, we have already started, quote unquote, implementing in our own way, which isn't really implementing, but we have asked all the teams members to read the book, right? Caleb and myself have read the second book with the new book that you guys co-authored. And we have, read the blogs, we have watched a bunch of video. There you go. We actually had a mini game that was set up, which is not really a mini game, but it's basically a game that we set up for our team for them to say, like, it's kind of like a game show trivia for a bunch of questions that Caleb and I created. And basically we put our team into like smaller teams of 2 for them to kind of compete, and there's a prize at the end of it. That was kind of our way to get the team into it. So we all, like, I guess compared to somebody who have heard the Great Game the first time, third time, we are slightly more knowledgeable on that already. But even with that, I acknowledge that, that's when you find out the questions that you know how to ask, whereas before we didn't even know what questions to ask.
Right.
Yeah.
Love it.
Well, let's put your coaching lessons into play here. There's a question from Joseph, who's from Ireland, and he's asking, what is the greatest challenge in implementing the Great Game methodology? What did you guys run into? What would you say that challenge is?
A global economic meltdown.
Besides the obvious.
No.
All right, Caleb wins.
Go ahead, Tony.
I'd say any change management, right? Any implementation of new system, the greatest risk of it not working is when there isn't sufficient engagement across all the team members, right? And so if that were the case, then you would just be, okay, well, there's a few leaders, if you will, to go in there. Hey, here's a framework. Follow this. Everybody go and do a huddle, and report a number. You own this line, that line, right? That just becomes another task that we're asking people to do when they don't truly understand it. And so what we, and taking advice of Catherine, we involved, basically, we got a small team. We got a small team of 12 people, right? So we incorporate everybody into the onsite. We got them to all take part and learn and read a book and, ask questions, and they all have one-on-one conversation with Catherine, right? So, so that they understand the why and the what, right? Whereas like we kind of figure out the how together. But even after that, as we go through each one of those activities in terms of, okay, well, what's the proper way in terms of, taking ownership of my line in the scoreboard? How do I create the right mini games for us? How do I ensure there's a line of sight between my daily activities to the overall company's goal? Like, those are the things where, as a leader, I think we need to really demonstrate how we can accomplish those things ourselves and lead by example. That to me was the most critical part. I can't say that we are like knocking out of the park. I mean, we're still pretty early on in the process, but I'm seeing some pretty good progress there. Whereas like, in the first week or two, like, the team members were like following the activities, but they don't really get it yet. Where like, as Caleb and Tony are starting to do more of those activities ourselves, we recently finally created our own individual player scorecard, and we got everyone to do it. And then they start to have a stronger line of sight, which further kind of adds on to what we had from the onsite, where we talked about the concept of line of sight, from the bottom up and top down and whatnot. So I think that is the number one challenge, but that challenge itself obviously kind of can be broken down into smaller challenges as well. That's the first one that comes to my mind.
Yeah, and I would say too, if there isn't an opportunity to take theory and put it into practice, like if Great Game was only ever theoretical for everybody, it would be a challenge, because you can't actually even play the game, never mind win the game, be an all-star or whatever, if you don't exercise clarity through action and being extremely vulnerable. Like we said right from the beginning, guys, we can either, Tony and I can go figure out how to play the game and then come back with a more polished version of this, or we can just jump into the mud together. So if there's no willingness to kind of get your hands dirty, I found that would create a challenge. Our opportunity, and that's why I say we're lucky, Steve, is that our opportunity was like the biggest opportunity you could ever dream up to play the game. Like, it's different than SRC, where they kind of built it in the middle of a crap storm, 82-1 or whatever it was, debt to equity. Ours was like a week before that. So it's like right away it was like we only got a week of practice, and then we were thrown into the big arena in terms of COVID. So,
yeah, for sure.
Hope that answers the question.
No, that does. What I heard, I mean, the foundational approach, to make sure you put the foundation in. Why are we doing this, and what is this really about? Is a big one. And then what you're talking about, Caleb, and just we use the term learning by doing. We can teach you all day. We can talk about this stuff all day, but go do it. And clarity through action, one of your values definitely is that approach, right? So, yeah, very good.
So, I really enjoyed the article that Darren Dahl wrote with you all. The interview was really something and very inspiring. It led to this interview, right? This podcast. So one of my favorite quotes, I'm just going to read a piece of it here for you. But it ends with my favorite quote out of the whole thing. Because I even started the podcast by saying, people are kept in the dark and out of the money. And so Great Game tries to break that wall down and say it's not an elite sport. But here's the quote. It says, since we opened the books and taught our people the reality of the situation, our people knew what to do. They knew what our cash runway was, and they went to work. And here it is. People can handle bad news. What they can't handle is no news. Man, can you talk about that a little bit?
That was an emotional decision between Tony and I to have that conversation on the Monday, right? The infamous Monday.
Yeah.
And was no question. It was the conversation, but it was, I mean, we're, like I said before, we're humans, right? So you have no idea how people are going to react to this. I was overly emotional at people's response to it in terms of how gracious everyone was and how it was like, okay, let's get to work, right? I mean, we had just come off the on-site, so it was just,
man.
I don't know, man.
That's good. My goal is to make you cry. So
well, you signed us with the best coach then.
Good. Well, I mean, that's
she
the
often,
thing is
she
that
often calls us her kids, and
yeah, man. I mean, that's a big deal, and to have you experience it so early in the process, I think it's great because this is an emotional thing because we're pulling the curtain back, we're opening the kimono, whatever you want to look at. That is a big deal, and I appreciate you being that vulnerable, for us and for the audience, because it is a huge deal for people to say, I don't have all the answers and I need your help. And by the way, here's the truth. So congratulations on that.
Yeah. Hey, Caleb, you mentioned something earlier. I think both of you talked a bit about that you're getting a lot of pressure. A lot of people were saying, look, you need to be looking at cutting back on expenses, including, with marketing business, a lot of those expenses are your people. So should you lay off your people? And you were seeing your friends and your family getting laid off left and right. And you had a peer group of leaders that you have a lot of advice from, were saying, don't be the hero, lay off your people. Can you talk a little bit about this and that decision? I would assume that was a tough decision to say, man, everybody's telling me to do this, but I feel like I need to do something different.
It was a tough decision because it wasn't a piece of advice that I got out of a book. It was a piece of very resounding advice from like a number of people that I hold very high esteem in terms of their, what they've been able to do. But ultimately, my decision was just to surface the conversation and surface the feelings between Tony and Catherine, and inevitably that's what ended up coming out, which was Catherine's recommendation to do the ABCD. So in my mind, it's like we are reacting by putting something in place that will tell us what to do based on a business case or a set of economic information versus Justin Trudeau going on the media and saying the sky is, well, he's our prime minister.
Yeah. That's good. Good catch.
Ex-drama teacher and snowboard instructor. But anyway, so no, that,
don't get us going.
that was the reaction, right? It was like, okay, this is real for me. And then Catherine stepped up with that recommendation.
Nice.
And I went back to the team. I went back to my group and said, hey, this is what we're doing. And then got the opportunity to sort of educate them a little bit. Like I'm a big advocate of GGOB, right? And so a great game. And so I'm like in an EO forum talking about great game events. Not how they drew it up.
Caleb, you said something really interesting when we talked to you earlier, Caleb, that in your EO group, that your peers didn't even know, some of the peers didn't even know that going open book was even an option. Is that?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think they recognized it as an option once we talked about it. But it's not a classically trained principle, of course, as we know, right?
Yeah. I just found that interesting.
Yeah. And I love EO and I just think there's opportunity to take this pieces of both. But great game is different because you can stop one person, you can't stop 100, right?
Mm-hmm.
I love it, man.
That's the concept.
Keep preaching the gospel, baby. So we're going to get practical here. We got a couple of questions from the community, and it's about time. I was going to ask you, what was the biggest stumbling block you encountered, but let me paraphrase that in some questions. So Sandeep has a couple of questions for you. How many days it took for you to reach your first huddle? And I'm going to guess that meant from inception. Any idea?
We had go ahead, Tony.
Yeah, for us, we were, so before the great game, we were, I'm mentioning how like we were quite an agile organization, right? So we practice, Scrum rituals, and we have like our own kind of all hands meeting kind of rhythm as well before we started implementing Great Games. So actually, before we actually brought in, Catherine into the family, we already attempted a huddle and modeled after what was. So let me step back for a little bit. While I was working in Accenture, I have witnessed the practice of the Great Game with another company, right? Which is really, really well done, I guess, from my perspective, having seen many massive organizations, the biggest bank in the world, the biggest mining companies in the world, some like Fortune 10 companies, right? I've seen how they've operated and how their team members' engagement and behaviors are. And then my very, very last client before I left Accenture was one which practiced the Great Game. And I got in there, it's like I see that at 10:57 a.m. every single morning when they had the big huddle, and then that's what they go to. They go to the scoreboard, they talk about what, the celebrations and whatnot, right? They go through that system. So we try to imitate what they were doing. But shortly after realized that, there's a lot of things that we've missed as key components of it. So I think what we did was that I think very, very shortly, to answer that question, is that very shortly after day one is like the on-site where we flew everyone together, and Catherine and Michelle were here. I think by the next week is when we started the first huddle already. But then the huddle gets improved and perfected throughout week by week, right? Like, the meeting minutes gets stronger and stronger. People's understanding about the weekly commits gets stronger and stronger, right? People's ownership about their line item that they're going to be reporting against during the scoreboard section gets better as well. Right? So
yeah, it was ugly. It was ugly to start. I think what you're saying too is, but clarity through action. And I do, another testament as to why you get a coach is that there was one particular meeting where Catherine pulled us aside and basically slapped our hands and said, "Okay, guys, time to grow up now and time to get on board here," right? So it was love.
That burns.
Awesome. But yeah, we started right away, and it's now to a place where I would say it's classic huddle.
Okay, cool. The other question,
12 weeks in, 13 weeks in right now.
You're about 12 or 13 weeks in now. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. So, and we'll come back to that, by the way, but this is another question from Sandeep. What did you do to jump from Great Game to mini games? I'm kind of interpreting that as saying you're working on the big game. Have you started playing mini games?
We are. We got a big pizza game going right now, and we have an office chicken wing game going right now that has a very football motif to it. I think we struggled out the gate understanding that the mechanism of the game needs to roll up in some way to the critical number.
Right.
We were practicing the concept of playing a game and having a goal and measurable, but refining over time. Now, we have 3 mini games in place right now, and all 3 of them directly impact. We're a first-year GGOB team, so we're leveraging net profit as our critical number.
Sure.
Yeah, which is, it's good for us, and so
it is.
I would say we're playing good games right now. Our first version of the game was right during COVID, so it was difficult.
Yeah, it was essentially, we define our initial 3 games, but then when COVID hits, some of those things that we're striving for are no longer relevant. So we had to stop those games because they were like, the things that needs to be done is no longer needed in marketplace, right? So that's what we came with the new games. But I'd say we're definitely picking up some good tractions in terms of how the mini games is driving behavioral change.
Yeah, I like that word driving, because we're always looking for drivers to that critical number for sure. I have another question, and I'll turn it back over to Rich. So you're 12, 13 weeks in. What would you say to people who say you're in your honeymoon phase and you're all just infatuated with the game and it's all shiny and new and doves and rainbows, but let's get into this for a while. What would you say about the honeymoon phase?
Yeah, but you know my answer to that. Do you want me to go?
Go for it.
My answer to that is it's we've witnessed a number of different kind of frameworks, methodologies in terms of business management. And in my case, because I have the benefit of being a consultant, and as a consultant before Hook and Ladder, we always basically immerse yourself in the client full time. There's some clients that I'm working with them full time, not 9 to 5, but every day for a year and a half, right? So the company really well, right? And I've probably worked for a course of at least 7 or 8 organizations throughout my time at Accenture to be able to see the different impact on the way how people practice business. And like I mentioned, I've seen humongous organization, famous organization, ones that your public perception is that these guys probably got their things together, right?
Yep.
I can tell you, comparing what I've seen in these other organizations versus this last organization that I was part of, which is they're growing, they're a big company growing 20+% every single year, and the way how they're forecasting and what they hit is actually basically identical, right? Which is really amazing. And you get in there, you can see people are really passionate about what they do, right? They're really appreciating the opportunity that they're there, right? So with that information as a background, I have a lot of faith. I have a lot of confidence in the system, beyond just what I've seen, firsthand with Catherine and Michelle and our team, but also a reference point from all these other companies. So that's my answer to that.
Great. Caleb, did you have something?
Well, right now we're working on some pretty intense SOPs for some of our different systems, and great game methodology is being woven into those. So it's by default, any new person that comes on is supposed to indoctrinate themselves in these SOPs, and it's woven into the narrative. So I think that because the team is so bought in, that's gonna give us a very bright post honeymoon phase, versus if it was just Tony and I continually needed to shove it down throats for new, that would be difficult, and we'd be at greater risk for having the honeymoon effect.
Yeah, I do love the fact that just for our audience, that you also subscribe to Jocko Willink's book, Extreme Ownership. So I know that discipline is a part of your pattern here. So between discipline and then creating processes, because processes outlast people, you've woven, as you say, into the DNA, the fabric of the business, some sustainability. So sustainability practices along with that discipline, that's the magic. Good stuff, guys.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk a bit about post honeymoon phase. You guys are a fast growing organization as well. You mentioned one earlier, Tony, the last big company you saw, they were growing fast. How do you see the great game of business and the practices helping you manage that level of growth?
It's a broad question, but the first thing that comes to mind is that by enabling the team to have the information, to have that transparency, that growth doesn't just have to be something that Tony and Caleb is going to come up with. It's going to be something where the team knows of the direction, they knows of the KPIs, and they know of their stake in the outcome as well, that we can really leverage the collective wisdom of the team to drive that growth. And that's going to change, that's going to be iterative, but the fact that we have a lot of brains as opposed to 2 gives me that confidence.
Mm-hmm.
And I would also say that because the big goal of the mini game is not just to have net profit impact, but also create systemic behavior change. I think that reestablishes what our foundation is, and you can only grow on strong foundation, and strong foundation is inspired by behavioral change, right?
Yes. Good point. We talk a lot about the great game of business, it's certainly about process, but you even mentioned it earlier, Tony, about driving the behaviors. And, sometimes the frameworks don't necessarily focus on just behavior change, getting people to think differently and do things differently and act on that. And I think that's a good point. That's what drives sustainability in the end, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Totally. I was a employee for a very, very long time, right? And the mindset is huge. I think what if you go to somebody who have never been exposed to these type of thinking, when you talk about mindset to them, it sounds like a very, very fluffy word. But now for me, having experienced that and having, been kind of consuming a lot of different content and thought leaders in terms of how they open up the mindset to take, for example, an ownership mentality, I can say there's a huge impact to what one can accomplish, what an organization can accomplish. So for sure.
One other thing I wanted to say is that I think that a lot of times we think that if we hire a coach for whatever it is, then that gives us license to sort of turn ourselves into autopilot and just let the coach take over. I know there was a lot of cases where, great coaches is definitely part of the equation, but as leaders, you got to like really, really lean into it. Otherwise it's not gonna happen. In those early days, like it was, I admittedly couldn't see the light, in the first 2, 3, 4 weeks of it. And so, that's when we lean on Catherine's shoulders. But at some point, we needed to really meet our end of the bargain and really lean into it. And that's when the spark started to fly a little bit. And now that we're Catherine, last week was her last week, right? So we're flying the plane by ourselves right now. And I feel a lot more prepared than I thought we were going to be. So.
It's there's a little known great game practice to when no one's looking to go like that, and then you feel better. So no, that's awesome. I'm so excited for you. Look, whenever we start with folks, and this has nothing to do with an age group either. This is absolutely everybody I've met anyway. Rich, tell me if I'm wrong here, but everybody starts with this phrase. Yeah, but we're different. Meaning our industry, our business, my team, etc. And I'm not saying, look, Mom told me I was special, and I still believe it to this day. But I will say this: you're in Canada, you're in digital marketing that's changing all the time. Tony, you've seen businesses all over the world. Tell me, does it matter that you're in Canada, that you're in marketing? Are we unique, or what is this great game? How does it apply to anybody? Does that make sense?
Makes sense. I think the concept of empowering people through transparency is universal, right?
Yep.
There's no, there may be cultural difference where one way of communication may work for one country but might not for the other. Mm-hmm. But in terms of, if you are bringing on people that you respect, you think they have their level, they're intelligent, they have a skill set to contribute to the table. And you believe, why would you believe that somebody with less information is going to perform higher? Like, that logic to me just doesn't make sense. So the concept about empowering people through information transparency, to me, works everywhere.
Yeah. Caleb, you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, we're all playing one game, and the way it's measured is with revenue and cost and EBITDA and dollars and cents, and I think leaning into that universal language. The fact that we're playing the same game as a heavy duty mechanic company, and we do like social media and influencer campaigns and digital advertising, and it's just like, but we're leaning into the exact same truth. That's universal language, right?
Awesome. I love it. Well, thanks guys for that. I will tell you, we're coming down toward the clock on the wall's telling us we got about 6 minutes left or so. Rich, I think you had some stuff coming in from the community, didn't you?
Yeah, another fairly technical question, but I think it's very, very important. This is a question that comes, let's see, how do you phase in different financial terms and reports? So how did you what was your way of introducing people to the financials and those terms and reports?
Fire hose. No. Go.
I know, when we first started out into onsite, there's a level of foundational knowledge which talks about just the basic financial thing. And by the way, Michelle Bridges is really good at doing it, right? I can't say across our team, everyone is super numbers oriented, but they all walked away with a good amount of financial foundation, that being one thing. But something that Michelle said during the onset, which I think really resonated, and I think that probably partially answered this question, is about relating some of these, company financial terminologies and information to any team member's personal life. Because everyone has a balance sheet personally. Everyone has a P&L personally. And those things will make sense. Everyone's going to pay your mortgage or your bills or whatnot. Well, how does a balance sheet of Tony Lamb looks like? Like if you can make that analogy for them and they can click, first of all, that's two things. One is that you help them understand those financial terminology better so then they can practice it in the business, but it also helps them personally in managing their finances as well. So that's the first thing that comes to mind.
Great approach. Great advice. How about you?
It really
Dave?
is. I love that.
Thoughts on that?
I mean, we rolled out all of the classic P&L line items all at once. I mean, we obviously consolidated certain lines, like just to make it easier for understanding purpose. We defined what would go into overhead, for example. Like we defined what that meant. But in our weekly huddle, it's just one overhead number that Tony reads out, and then everything else is broken down by our service area revenue lines and their corresponding either subcontractor or fixed costs. And so all the classic P&L and balance sheet stuff was just all rolled out at once, and we just committed to a couple weeks of narrative around explaining what those meant.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We also have financial sound bites that we incorporate in our huddle, right? Which kind of helps us slowly drip information about, like, one of the huddles, we would have financial soundbite of 5 minutes talk about, just the concept of cash flow. Why is it so important? How do we look at our health of cash balance, for example, like, something along those lines. So then it's, when it comes to learning something brand new, I do believe that, constant spaced repetition is what helps, right? When you say it the first time, they get 20% of it. You say the second time, third time, and then when they can relate it to the personal experience as well, then eventually it'll click.
Yes.
Nice.
It's when they start making fun of you behind your back, saying those terms. That's when they got it.
I love it. Well, Rich, we're about at time, so I'm going to let you ask the last question, and we'll wrap up.
Guys, I'm just curious. I mean, what's your long-term vision for Hook and Ladder? Where do you want to take this organization, and where do you want to take your people?
Well, we want to be on the stage in Missouri at one point, but that's
an all-star. Okay.
Yeah, baby. I love that aspiration.
Yeah, no, I mean, we want there's a lot of things. I think I want the stake in the outcome to be something that is like very significant.
Mm-hmm.
If the stake in the outcome is significant, that means that everything else has been taken care of. We want to fulfill a big part of our mission, right? Which is like to play the great game of business in a way that leaves people much better, afterwards than they were before being a part of the organization. Like, we don't aspire to be like we love digital marketing, but it's not all we ever talk about. It's not the reason why we're building an agency where we've seen people's personal lives transform by being a part of Hook and Ladder. And so that is definitely a big part of what I want to see going forward. And we want to, obviously, all the classics, we want to be profitable. We want to have great cash flow, great revenue, so that we can feed that mission, not so that, just for the sake of having the money.
I actually see a lot of similarity in terms of the great game organization's vision with our vision, right? Like, you, as Steve, you kind of started out saying, where a big part of what the great game organization is about basically, empowering people so they understand that this is not a, elite club or whatnot, right? So in our case, it's very similar, right? First of all, practicing the great game allows us to do that to our employees, our team members. But at the same time, we're a marketing agency, and one thing that we see as a challenge in the industry is that there's certainly those elite club type of concept where the large organization, they have access to marketing that the small and medium-sized business just don't.
Right.
So our vision is to go and level that playing field, in that arena.
Yeah, love it. Democratize digital marketing. That's awesome. Well, gentlemen, what can I say? Caleb Clark, Tony Lamb, thank you so much. I've got some takeaways. I always like to kind of wrap it up with some thoughts because I'm a simpleton. So if I can get it, anyone can. I love the comment about people are addicted to creating things and they want to put their fingerprint on it. I think that is awesome. And we all want to be valued. And that's a great way to do it, to have an influence on the future and be a part of something bigger than ourselves. So let me go to the next one here. Would you learn to swim without a swimming instructor? That is like, no, thank you. It sounds terrible. So I like that one. How about you just said these two, when the stake in the outcome is substantial enough, everything else is taken care of. That's awesome because that means everybody's sharing in the rewards they created right through their efforts. And finally, we want to leave people better off than we found them. That is right at the heart of our mission. So guys, man, what can I say? Thank you so much. Appreciate you.
A lot of fun.
Yeah, lots of fun. Lots of fun.
Likewise.
We'll talk to you again.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for your insights. Enjoy.
So we're going to look forward to next week. We're going to be talking to Dr. David Stern from Xperity. He's a very big part of the Great Game of Business community. You'll love that. He's super energetic and has created some amazing stuff at his organization. I would like to promote the Get in the Game workshop next week. So you just heard about what Caleb and Tony are going through, and they're literally 12, 13 weeks in. They're in level 1. That's what we're going to be talking about next week, June 16th through 17th. It's 2 full days. I'll actually be walking you through the 10 steps of implementation, the same steps that we go through with our coaches and clients. So it's very interactive. It is virtual, but if you come, we want you to be ready to participate. It's going to be very fast-paced, lots of information, fire hose, I think, as Caleb said. We'll be keeping you busy, making sure that you learn the steps and the tools and get ready to implement in your organization. Look, let's keep the conversation going. You know, send us your questions, your best practices, your ideas, your challenges, your victories. And remember that you're the backbone of the economy. We talked about it today, didn't we, Rich? You know, you're not alone. There is no society without business. So if we're going to really change the game, we have to close that gap between the haves and have-nots. And we do that by teaching people how business works. When we get smarter, the gaps get smaller. You are the new teachers. So evangelize. Let's connect with like-minded and like-hearted people into our global Great Game community and make that global impact. Rich Armstrong, thank you, as always. We are committed. We'll be here every Friday. So be sure to tune in next time for the Change the Game podcast. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, everyone.